What is going on? It is not a New York Times bestselling author, Devin Thorpe here, going to go through my list of top 5 movies that I watched in 2024, as well as the top 5 movies that I am anticipating to see in 2025. Now, I saw a lot of movies in theaters in 2024. I'll go ahead and throw up a couple of selfies. I started a little bit later in the year, started taking selfies of when I attended the movies. I would just grab a picture with the movie poster. These pictures aren't all the movies I've seen. I also saw, in addition to this, off the top of my head, I saw It Ends With Us, the movie that was based on Colleen Hoover's novel, as well as Dune Part 2. But for some reason, I didn't start the trend of taking selfies with the movie posters until later on in the year. I like to think of myself as someone who watches pretty much any kind of genre if it looks good. I watch sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, rom-coms. I love horror movies, so pretty much any genre of film you can think of is something that I'm open-minded to seeing. As I'm sure you can tell from the selfies that I provided, it's a pretty wide range of movies that I saw in 2024. So let's hop into my list of the top 5 movies I saw in 2024. I will put the timestamp for when movies I'm anticipating in 2025 starts, just in case you don't really care about the 2024 recap. You can skip straight to the 2025 portion. But coming in at number 5, we have... Before I say this, I'll say that picking the number 5 slot was actually more difficult for me than picking the number 1 slot. And that's because I knew that inevitably, whichever movie I put in slot number 5, that meant that every single other movie that wasn't set in a slot was not going to be making the list for my favorite movies of 2024. So with that said, I put in the number 5 slot Wolverine vs. Deadpool. This ended up beating out a couple honorable mentions like Gladiator 2, Nosferatu, Venom, Till Death Do We Part. It ended up beating out those honorable mentions solely because I felt like Wolverine vs. Deadpool was just a more fun, entertaining experience, and ultimately it's probably the movie that I'm going to revisit and rewatch the most out of all of my honorable mentions, and so for that reason alone, it was worthy enough to win the number 5 slot. I've always enjoyed the Deadpool movies, Deadpool 1, Deadpool 2, but even more than that, I have always enjoyed Hugh Jackman's portrayal of the Wolverine since I was a little kid. I was raised watching X1, X2, X3. I loved, as a teenager, the Wolverine Origins movie. And so I was one of the people that was very sad when Logan was released, and it felt, or at the time, it was said that Hugh Jackman was no longer going to be portraying the role of Wolverine, and so to see him come back, reprise that role, and wear the actual OG Wolverine suit in Deadpool versus Wolverine was very nostalgic. And then pair that with the fact that the writing, the dialogue, the plot of the movie was funny, it was witty, it was sharp, it was interesting. There was very little lag time or time that I did not enjoy in the plot, and so it was just an all-in-all great movie, great addition to the MCU, and I'm glad that it kind of connected the characters owned by Fox and the characters owned by Disney in a way that hopefully in the Marvel Universe's future will continue to incorporate. I know they have plans to bring X-Men into the MCU as well as Fantastic Four, and so I'm really excited to see what possibilities Wolverine vs. Deadpool opened up for the MCU. Coming in at number 4 on my list was actually probably the most surprised I was in a movie in all of 2024, and that was Mufasa. When I saw that they were going to be making another Lion King live-action movie and that it was going to be based on Mufasa's life, I was incredibly skeptical, like most other people who reacted to it. When I was a kid, my favorite character in all of the Disney movies was Scar. I don't know why, but as a child, I always gravitated towards liking the villains of stories. I loved Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, more than I loved Luke Skywalker and Yoda, but I always loved the role that villains played, especially in Disney movies, and so I always liked Scar when I saw the cartoon version of The Lion King as a kid, and so I was really worried that by telling his backstory, it was going to make me not like The Lion King just in general as much as I did when I was younger, but that was not the case at all. In fact, in my mind, the Mufasa movie ended up being a better, more fun experience than the actual original Lion King. If anything, the Mufasa movie ended up making me appreciate Scar that much more, and I loved just the central message that cowardice can turn even well-intentioned men into monsters, and so for that reason, Mufasa ended up in my top 5, specifically in the number 4 slot. The movie that ended up in my 3rd slot for 2024 was actually a movie that I had not even heard of until it hit theaters. It was not in my most anticipated list for 2024, and until it started, showing up on my recommended feed on YouTube, the trailer did, I did not know anything about this film, and I am so glad that I saw this movie. That movie is Heretic. Heretic tells a story of these 2 girls that are a part of the Latter-day Saints, or Jehovah's Witness, who go door to door, essentially trying to speak to strangers and convert them to their faith, or just have religious and theological conversations with these strangers. And then the main characters are these 2 females that show up to this man's door, and it turns out that this man is this sinister, diabolical, yet charismatic person who is able to lure them into his home that is a trap in which they cannot escape. Now, in undergrad, I was a religion and philosophy major, so this movie had a lot of symbols and themes that really gravitated toward me and just piqued my intellectual curiosity. Ultimately, it forces the audience to reflect on what they believe in, and whether or not that's a belief they'd be willing to die for. And for that reason, along with the enveloping suspense and horror that this movie brings, it was probably the most immersed I've been in a movie in all of 2024. In fact, as soon as I finished watching it the first time, I immediately called my dad because he's a huge horror movie buff, and I was like, when I come home next, we are sitting down and we're watching this movie because it was amazing and it's going to draw you in. And so that's what we ended up doing. When I came home for Thanksgiving holiday, we watched it together. He loved it, and it's probably his favorite movie of 2024. Coming in slot number 2 for my top movies of 2024 is Dune Part 2, which originally I had thought was going to be, it was going to take the first slot. I loved Dune Part 1. Dune Part 2 was absolutely incredible, even better than Dune Part 1. The whole Dune mythos is something that I've been in love with since I read the novel as a teenager. I've since read the book multiple times since then, and it's just a story that gets better and better the more you read it. I've not read all of the Dune books. I've read the first 3 Dune books, which is what I believe the movies are going to encapsulate through the second book when the 3rd movie comes out. But I do love how the Dune Part 2 movie does stay very faithful to the plot and overall message that the book tries to convey, in the sense of, is Paul Atreides this prophesied savior that was foretold to come, or is he really just this person who, thanks to the Bene Gesserit and their propaganda spreading throughout the universe, is kind of just this propped up, archetypal savior figure that ultimately is destined to be the villain of this entire story. I know what I just said was overcomplicated and really nerdy, but all in all, this movie was gorgeous. The performances put on by Timothy Chalamet, Austin Butler, Zendaya, everyone in this movie gave phenomenal performances. The score is breathtaking, and seeing it in theaters was one of the best experiences of 2024. And so for that reason, it is number 2. Literally the only thing that separates this from my number 1 slot is the fact that I would be more willing to rewatch my number 1 slot than Dune Part 2. And now for the first slot. Coming in at number 1 was Alien Romulus, which absolutely shocked me. I knew that I was going to like this movie, but I was raised in a household where you either were a diehard Predator fan or a diehard Alien fan. And me and my father had always been diehard Predator fans. My dad raised me watching the original Arnold Schwarzenegger Predator film, and then I watched all of the subsequent sequels, for the better or worse, and there's a lot of worse in that franchise. But other than the Alien versus Predator collaboration or those movies, that was the only exposure I had to Alien prior to 2024. And so going into Alien Romulus, I didn't really know what to expect. So I watched a couple of summary videos from the original Alien trilogy that came out decades ago. And although it seemed like a really cool concept that I knew I would enjoy, I had never really exposed myself to that franchise. And Alien Romulus is what really came in and showed me what I was missing out on for the 27 years I've been alive. And I'm also really weary most of the time with franchises that, launch a reboot like this. There's so many movies that have, run their franchise into the ground. I think Terminator is a perfect instance of this, where, it's been done so many times that we as fans just don't really want to see any more of it done. But that is not what Alien Romulus is. This was such a beautiful yet horrifying movie at the same time. It had comedic elements in it that the characters delivered at just the right points, yet it had very suspenseful, sitting on the edge of your seat moments where you could hear a pin drop in the movie theater. I mean, the only way to put it is that it quite literally felt like when you were sitting in the movie theaters, you were in an alien spacecraft in the middle of outer space, nowhere to go, trapped on a ship that had aliens on it that wanted to kill you. And being able to set that kind of tone for an audience is not something that's easily done, and it's something that this movie absolutely delivered on. And out of the 5 movies on this list, it is probably the one movie that I will rewatch faithfully every single year for probably decades to come. Now, I'm going to run through my top 5 most anticipated films of 2025. I'm going to run through these kind of quick so that I can keep this video as short as possible and not bore anyone who's watching. However, I've got 3 quick honorable mentions to add before getting to the top 5 list. And those are The Accountant 2, Mickey 17, and How to Train Your Dragon. The Accountant 2, just because I really did enjoy the first Accountant movie with Ben Affleck. It was just a really thrill-seeking movie to watch. And I'm excited to see that they are continuing that franchise. I think Ben Affleck really did kill that performance. And so I'm just glad to see that hopefully it doesn't suffer from sequel syndrome, and it does deliver a plot just as intriguing as the first one. Mickey 17, if you're unaware, is a Robert Pattinson movie coming out in 2025. It's pretty ambiguous about what the plot is about just from watching the trailer, but I have really loved all of the movies Robert Pattinson has been in lately, and so I'm excited to see what that movie's about and the role that he plays. I could easily see Mickey 17 wowing me and ending up in my top 5 by the end of 2025. And How to Train Your Dragon is an honorable mention just because definitely not a movie that needed to be made again. I very much enjoyed the animated version of it, and I feel like the live action version of it is just to create a movie for adults who are too embarrassed to say they watch animated movies. But with that being said, Toothless is a timeless legend, and he reminds me of my Rottweiler Atlas. And so for that reason alone, I will be seeing How to Train Your Dragon live action in theaters. Now, to the top 5 list. At number 5, I have Avatar 3. For obvious reasons, Avatar has continued to be a movie that was, at least the original, that was way ahead of its time as far as visual graphics, CGI, storytelling, and it's one of my favorite franchises that has something new and original to tell. So often these days, it feels like Hollywood is just taking the formula of what has worked in the past and just recycling it and rebooting all these different series. For example, like I mentioned, Terminator, Jurassic Park, Alien, Predator, so many of these different movies that, reached success decades ago that they're just rebooting and redoing in modern times. And so it's nice to see that a movie that was made, within the past 20 years is continuing on in its franchise. It has a fresh, original take, original story to tell an audience, and I'm glad to see that James Cameron is pursuing this series. I've seen that he's already, written up to Avatar 5, the script for Avatar 5, and so I will continue to support that franchise at all costs. Even ended up going to Disney World for the first time in like over 20 years this past year with my girlfriend, and I got to go to Avatar World, Avatar Land, whatever they call it, and it was super, super cool. A really cool, immersive experience that just makes me that much more excited for the next Avatar film. At number 4 for most anticipated, I've got Tron Ares. Now, I've never been a huge Tron fan. In fact, I've never even seen the original Tron movie that was put out quite a while ago. But when I was a kid, that was around the time that Tron Legacy came out, and I do love that film. I think it's a great story. I have done research into the original Tron, universe and movie and what it's about, and I do think that is just such a relevant tale to be telling nowadays with the emergence of AI and how exponentially it's growing, as well as the gaming community that is prevalent pretty much worldwide at this point. And so I think Tron is a story that does have a very relevant plot for the modern day moviegoer. And so there's not really much that's been revealed about the plot of Tron Ares. Hopefully, I know that Jared Leto is in it. Hopefully he can break his curse that seems to follow him everywhere he goes, where it seems like every movie Jared Leto has been in, or at least has been in recently, has been like a box office failure. But the concept art that I've seen for Tron Ares looks stellar. It looks amazing. The Tron Legacy movie was beautiful, and I can only imagine that Tron Ares will continue in having the same use of color stylistically and original storytelling. But obviously it has been released that Tron Ares does plan on including in its plot something pertaining to artificial intelligence, which I think will be a cool adaptation for 2025. Number 3, this may come as a surprise, but actually in my 3rd slot I have The Weeknd's new movie, Hurry Up Tomorrow. This is something that earned the 3rd slot for me just because The Weeknd is my favorite artist of all time musically. I have been in the top 0.5% of his listeners for the last 4 years. I love his music a lot. I'm going to his tour this year for his last album, Hurry Up Tomorrow. But with that being said, he did release the trailer for his movie that kind of accompanies this album, and that trailer did look phenomenal. It looks like, you know, it's one of those trailers that really doesn't give anything away, so you still don't really know exactly what the movie is about. But from what the trailer does show, it looks like a very fast-paced thriller that kind of plays on a psychological horror element, which, you know, I have always been a huge fan of John Carpenter and psychological horror, so it's definitely a movie that I'm looking forward to. I could easily see it being a bust and potentially not being in my top 5 by the end of the year, but with that being said, I still have hope. For my second slot, I have Fantastic Four: First Steps. I was raised on the first 3 Fantastic Four movies that had the original Chris Evans as Human Torch and, you know, Rise of the Silver Surfer. I still remember when Rise of the Silver Surfer came out, I was of an age that I was still playing with action figures, and I remember my mom worked at Target and took me to the back room and let me pick out action figures of Doctor Doom, the Silver Surfer, Human Torch, and it was just a super nostalgic memory for me, a very nerdy memory for me, but still something that I'll never forget. And so I just am really hoping that this new rendition of the Fantastic Four is something that does it justice and something that you know, segues into a greater story within the MCU. And so last but not least on my list of most anticipated films is the James Gunn 2025 Superman movie. I think DC fans everywhere are incredibly excited to see James Gunn's version and iteration of Superman, even though I'm a huge Henry Cavill fan of the Superman he played in the Snyderverse, and I could obviously make a whole other video about the Snyderverse and my opinion of it. With that being said, I am sad that Henry Cavill is not reprising his role, but I do think that David Cornsweet is going to do a fantastic job. I think this is a time where DC fans everywhere just want to see it done right finally, and to see a DC character other than Batman have a time to shine. Obviously, we got Matt Reeves' The Batman with Robert Pattinson, and it was fantastic. It was a great story. But, you know, I think DC fans everywhere, now more than ever, want to see a great Superman movie, a great Aquaman movie, a great Flash movie, Wonder Woman, whatever. We just want to see these characters that we've read comic books of our entire lives portrayed in a comic accurate manner with a great story and breathtaking visuals, all a part of a universe that is ultimately successful. And I do think that James Gunn likely has a great vision for being able to provide that for DC fans everywhere, as well as people that might not be fans of DC. And so I'm looking forward to the new Superman movie in 2025. I think from the trailer, it looks like it's going to set up great for the DC universe entirely. And so with that being said, let me know if there are any particular movies you're wanting to see me review after they release in theaters, and I will post that review to this channel. Other than that, I look forward to a great year of movies, and I will see you in the next video.